AskReddit by alarming Basil 6205. People who cut off their family, what did they to you? Grew up in an explosive and abusive household. When I was finally able to move out, I started distancing myself. Mom went off the deep end. Started out accusing me of sleeping with every single person I know. Yes, every person. Coming up with outlandish stories for why I was an awful person. Threatening suicide. When I cut her off completely, she started stalking me. I changed my number and moved to a new state. I did not give anyone, including my brother, my new home address, and started receiving cards in the mail from her last year. Legal action is probably called for. I was 10 years old. I was given to a 34-year-old man to be his third wife. My parents were so happy because it was a great honor to them that I was chosen out of all of the girls there to be with the man that was second in charge. I was smuggled out a month before my 13th birthday. Was deprogrammed. Tried to end my own life when I was 16 BC of what I went through. I'm still alive. I'll be 49 this year. I don't know if my parents are even alive. Deleted. I found out my dad wasn't really my dad, and then my mother proceeded to lie about what actually happened. I experienced a childhood full of physical and verbal abuse, but he never laid a hand on my sisters. Now I know why. I corroborated the truth via other family members before cutting off all contact with mom and dad, still close with sisters though. It always amazes me when I hear stories about a parent letting their child get abused just so they can't stay with some shitty person. I'm so sorry. My cousin had addiction problems and just burned every bridge in our family. Used to be we'd buy him food and stuff he needs instead of just giving him money because it'd go straight to more drugs, but he eventually became so toxic we couldn't even do that. Did he eventually sort his shit out? My father was an abusive alcoholic who left us when I was a teen after several suicide attempts. He was clearly not okay mentally. We reconnected in my early 20s, and when I finally started to build my trust for him again, he disappeared. He tried to reconnect with me a year later when he needed something. I haven't spoken to him since then. Edit. He attempted suicide. It's always when they want something. I cut out my mother's side of the family. Her sister and brother made it their personal goal to financially ruin my parents. Then the other sister piled on. All three of them had been borrowing money from my grandparents for years, and when the other sister sold my grandparents' house out from under them because they can't live on their own anymore, my grandparents were appalled when they were told by my aunt that she was putting them in a home. So they lived with my parents instead, and the other siblings accused my parents of taking their inheritance. They harassed, stalked, and vandalized my parents' property until both grandparents were dead. I will never forgive them and hope their own children treat them as poorly as they treated my parents and grandparents. Wow, they really were evil and greedy people. Just saw their parents as a bank account. Mother was never really present. Even after my father died. Father died when I was not an adult. House was left to 4 of his sons. One brother conned us into signing the house over to him for loan purposes to fix the house up. Stole house. Another brother stole from me and my family with high regularity. Forgave him a bunch of times. Kept doing it, so I gave up. Extended family non-existent. With all that being said, I have a fantastic relationship with the last brother. I got the same thing with my mom though as an adult. Never really there, but once my dad died and she still wasn't there, I was like, fuck this. It sucks so much because it feels like suddenly being a total orphan. They threatened my life and then reported me to my country's officials for being a runaway. I was 26, a heathen, a whore, and, I wish this was a joke, a witch. All are crimes in my country. So yes. I have nothing to do with them anymore. My parents reported me missing too, after I told them I was moving out when I finally turned 18. They were verbally, mentally and physically abusive. It was cult-like environment. First time I saw Turpin family case, it made me realize I was not brought up normal. Hopefully you're in better health and have found happiness in life. My new stepfather in a drunken rage tried to choke me out because I did not agree with his views. My mother did nothing to stop it and took his side. 22 years later, have not spoken to anyone in my family. It's so tough when one parent is abusive and the other one is desperate to keep the peace. It's not your job to unbrainwash your parents. Dad sexually abused sister. Mother and other sister chose his side. Yeah, we don't talk much. What the fuck? They chose his side despite the action he did? My birth mother was totally unprepared for motherhood and considered me a threat to her relationship to my dad. She locked me in my room at 3 for several hours a day and hit me with spoons. In middle school she left over homecoming weekend to see her boyfriend. Dad was still married to her, and missed my freshman homecoming. She doesn't care about me at all. Just stress. Every phone call, every visit, holidays, events. Constantly berated, questioned and feuding. I didn't cut them off in the sense of no contact. I just stopped caring. I don't ask, I don't get involved. Phone calls last 3 minutes because I have nothing to share, everything is good here. Holidays I eat and leave. And I'm too busy for random drop-ins because kids have sports and friends and I have hobbies. When they come to me and vent, I simply respond in unique ways that they'll figure it out, and I'm unsure what I do in their place. Perfect. I believe this is called grey rock, as in you become about as interesting as one. Good on you for protecting yourself. I cut out my entire side of my mom's family after her funeral. I was 17. Her family had always been a difficult bunch. My mom had a stalker at the time of her death. He claimed to the family he was her fiancé. And they believed him over me. Despite the restraining order and proof of abuse, they chose that man over me. So I cut them out. Them only contributing a $100 donation to the funeral costs really helped that decision also. She had 3 birth siblings and 12 adopted siblings, several aunts and uncles and cousins, and they came up with $100. Fuck that and them. That was 8 years ago. Last I heard, her stalker spent Christmas with them. So my choice feels validated. This is nuts. Grandmother told me that's what I get for having children out of wedlock when my infant son died. Yeeted her ass right out the front door. Have not spoken to her in about 10 years. From what I've heard from an uncle, she is dying of a brain tumor. Could not happen to a more deserving person. My friend's mom used to beat the crap out of her and emotionally torture her stepson. When I heard she had cancer, I was like, oh, thank God it's her and not someone worth anything. Through no fault of our own, my mom and I became the black sheep of the family. We were excluded from family dinners, family get-togethers, and family trips. We decided we liked it that way, and just let it happen. Hakuna Matata. Good thing you're together and she's a good person, unlike most of the cases here. I didn't, they did. I decided to leave Mormonism and they chose a church over me. Same. It sucks. Sorry that was your experience as well. My uncle and aunt, whom I lived with from the age of 15 to 19, they always treated me as an inconvenience even though they are the ones who suggested I went to live with them. They had me clean up after them and their kids. They got mad at me when I ate too much of their food, caused me to have stunted growth and an eating disorder. Made fun of me for being depressed and always discouraged me from doing any type of extracurricular activity at school because they didn't want me to make their kids seem like mediocre losers. They overshared family secrets with me and basically made me feel like I had to share those same resentments towards other people in my family in order to be welcomed into their home. To this day, I still have trust issues with everyone in my life and I rarely allow myself to make new friends. Deleted. If we're honest, being a bad son to a terrible father is almost a compliment. But more importantly, folks like that usually know their words will do something. He's just looking to get a response. It's attention-seeking behavior. From what you've written, just know he's stewing with his own thoughts and should be left that way. My dad died the day before Father's Day. She who birthed me openly disregarded every one of his final wishes, up to and including the place of burial. Since then I've gone full scorched earth. Never mind the years of physical, psychological, and financial abuse meted out to the both of us all our lives. I was prepared to forgive her up to that point. For him, no. She called my father weak for not making his wishes known to her, and stated that mental illnesses were a hoax, a crutch for the weak. I informed her right then and there that I was no longer her child, and she can rot in that miserable mausoleum she calls a house. I am organizing a proper memorial service the way Dad wanted. I've also been making cover trips taking everything of sentimental value from Dad's upstairs apartment when she hasn't been home, and I have opened a separate bank account preparing for the day she dies. I have Dad exhumed and buried in the place he loved and wanted. I will make everything right that she has wronged, mark my words. She is dead to me, and anyone who stands with her is an enemy. I had a baby when I was 16. Because I was so young, I had to continue living with my parents along with the baby. When I turned 18, my parents encouraged me to go off to college and said they would look after the baby while I was gone, and then I could have my child when I finished school. Of course, I visited my child all the time, but my parents and my sister started a smear campaign against me, stating that I was a terrible mother who abandoned her child. I knew things were being said, but I didn't realize it came from the people who were closest to me. I didn't really find out the level of cruelty until I finished school and wanted to resume care for my child. My parents got a lawyer and threatened to make my life hell if I didn't walk away. I was broke, young, and naive, so I walked away. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, but I cut them off. I had to for my own sanity. That is so disgusting, and I'm so sorry that this happened to you and that you were deeply betrayed in this manner. Happy to hear that you and your child are back together again. To put it short and simple, going through basic training was a fucking vacation compared to my childhood. My instructors would scream in my face every day, but at least I knew they actually cared under their cruelty. There was method to the madness to make us into soldiers. They were polite compared to my parents. I'm imagining that they're either confused at how little they can move you, or they've seen it enough that they know exactly why that is. My father knows exactly how to hurt me emotionally and does it with a disturbing amount of glee. His family is convinced he's a good person that will move heaven and earth for me. Yeah, it got like that around the tail end for me. He was addicted to his anger and was tearing shit apart so he could have some semblance of control over the life he started to mess up. Grandmother would quote scripture and refuse to let up on it, and would invite him over when I visited and take his side while claiming she was neutral. I just walked out and was basically done with it. Grandmother has stopped but basically feels like she's written me off. But honestly, I'm over it. Didn't completely cut them off, but I'm extremely estranged. Mother was very neglectful of me growing up, drinking problem and depression. Would rather buy cigarettes than food, so I was hungry all the time. Didn't pay rent, so I was scared and embarrassed because landlord would approach me on the street. Left me alone for long hours when I was young and I got raped, and her first words were, "Don't tell your brother. He won't know how to deal with it." Suffice to say, I knew I needed to take care of myself and stop letting them hurt me. Mum told me she hoped I off myself. Most recent thing. Stepdad was a pedo. The rest hated that I wasn't mild-mannered and placid, and also wouldn't let me talk about being lesbian to anyone outside the family because of embarrassment. Big hugs, friend. I'm in the same boat. I don't even refer to them as mom or stepdad, just their first names or biological mother and the pedophile. The last straw was the amount of hate in her eyes when I decided to be the bigger man and come back to apologize after a fight. I just realized I didn't have to fucking put up with it if I didn't want to. We could either both be miserable all the time, or I could cut her off and only she would be. I cut off everyone in my father's family after I came forward about him abusing me sexually for years. My uncle suggested it was a bad dream. My grandmother said it was normal for a man to get erections at his daughter. That's not all he did in the slightest. My auntie told me to go to the police so a mob wouldn't come to him, and then helped him leave the country to stay at her house with her 2 young daughters, and his father defended him and tried to convince my mother to meet my father in person. He would have hurt or killed her, no doubt in my mind. This man horrifically abused me and my family only to be defended tooth and nail. It hurts not seeing my little cousins, but if I'd rather go blind than ever have to see my father again. On the brighter side, since cutting him out of my life, I've moved in with my boyfriend, who I was dating in secret, and helped me to come forward about what my father was doing. I've grown closer than ever with my mum and visit her as often as I can, and I've got a fucking dog now. I was never allowed dogs, and now I have a beautiful border collie named Sky who I adore. I've never been happier, and even though I am still very mentally unwell, even suicidal often, I am in a much better place. It really does get better. Got tired of my overdramatic gaslighting narcissistic mother's behavior. Wrote off her, my dad, who always backed her up no matter what, and both of my sisters since they're her flying monkeys. Life is good without the stress of their involvement in our lives. After my grandmother passed, one of my sisters tried to sell her house. The house was left to one of my brothers and I on the condition that we maintain it and let our aunt who had polio live there as long as she could. Aunt left for a month to see a specialist and get started on a new PT treatment regime. Came home to find a realtor showing the house. She was completely unapologetic about it and tried playing it off as she was doing us a favor because we would no longer be responsible for the house. That is just straight up an attempt at fraud. I was adopted, and a hyper obese kid. Like 600 LHS super early on. They would literally mock and put blame on me for everything. One day my grandfather died, and in the hospital, my grandmother and mother screamed it was my fault because I was so fat. Never forgive them. A few years later, left and never looked back. I'm no contact with my sister. She was a difficult child, especially as a teen, and did stupid shit like date my ex-boyfriend, etc. After I had a baby, she would email and text me non-stop about how I could sell my plus-size clothing online and make a bunch of money. She became a gym rat and would body shame everyone on the family. She scammed the military into early retirement and does nothing all day except go to the gym and grift. My mom thinks she's the greatest, but I can't stand her. It's nice to hear someone else who cut contact with a sister like this. There was no huge betrayal, but I really could not accept her warped priorities, plus there was some disrespect that I just couldn't take. She also lies and manipulates my parents frequently for money, and they treat her as the golden child. There's always an excuse for her. She's unemployed but constantly pretending to have a creative career so she can spend my parents' money on her fake lifestyle. Locked me in the basement with no food, no electronics other than a CD player, no outside communication at all, just the same books I read over and over again, including but not limited to Sexual Homicide, Patterns and Motives by Johnny Douglas, Ann Burgess, and Robert Ressler. This started at age 13 until I ran away from my father and stepmother at 14. I'm currently polite to my mother because I'm financially dependent on her, but once I'm not, I'm cutting her off as well. She sent me to conversion therapy when I was 16 and not only refuses to apologize, but she also said she'd do it again. Conversion therapy is so awful to be forced to go through. I hope you can heal from the damage done and be free from her soon. While I haven't initiated any cutoffs from my side of the family, I've just not felt like accepting the olive branch after 20 years of no contact. My wife and I mutually cut off her mother and stepfather after her mother repeatedly came over to watch our children and was on Facebook the whole time, making our oldest do everything for her sister. The final straw was when they asked to take both children to a Christmas party, forgot the 2-year-old until they were almost in their car, and proceeded to berate the 10-year-old when she pointed out that it wasn't a little mistake but was in fact a big deal. They then changed tactics and tried to make her feel like it was her fault for losing her sister. We made it to their apartment before they did, grabbed our kids and haven't seen them since. My aunt had 3 kids and verbally and mentally abused the oldest 2 to the point that they cry every time they get a call from her, and the oldest one moved out of the house when she was around 15. I don't talk to family that poison the well with other family. If they talk too much about other family members, I don't talk to them. My mom maintains an infinitely long list of gripes about all relatives. My dad and myself, the son included. Every time she starts recounting the list, I just start asking if it's worth it and if holding on to all of it for so long is making her life any better or not. She never has an answer. Lived with my brother for 3 months. Thanks to him stealing my food and eating everything in the apartment, I was often limited to a single can of creamed corn, the only thing we had that he wouldn't eat, a day. I lost 60 pounds in 3 months and still have health problems related to it. I don't talk to him anymore after that. My brother saw me. My parents decided to hide it and told me if I tell anyone my parents would go to jail. They never got me the help I needed. Now many years later I'm getting help and trying to heal. My dad has decided he doesn't want any part in it. He would just rather be enraged about politics and my cousin being trans than to help me and stand up for something that actually matters. Whenever it gets brought up, he changes the subject. I've since cut off my brothers and their families. I am working on cutting my dad off as well. So sorry you went through that. This is unfortunately more common than many know. Family covering a brother sexually abusing a sibling and then denying it all. Someone close to me had lived it too. Therapy has helped. My mother did meth with my younger sister, who then developed a heroin addiction. The heroin addiction landed her in jail. While my sister was in jail, my mother proceeded to hook up with the father of aforementioned sister's children. Yes, the father of her grandchildren. In my home while I was hosting family Christmas. Unbelievably, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Some people are just terrible human beings, whether they birth you or not. My dad passed away 5 years ago. His family is notorious known as the people who get drunk. My dad's funeral was pretty good until my uncles got drunk. We still have contact, but there's not a lot of contact with them. Grew up Mormon. Left the church at 18. Parents wouldn't talk to me except to tell me I was deceived by Satan and living in sin. Eventually just stopped talking to them except to coordinate visiting family. Now, over 10 years later, they're trying to reach back out and talk to me about my life, but I've learned to live without them so long. I don't have the need for them in my life. It's mostly small talk like with a stranger in a bar. It's hard to fit them back into my life when they had no place for so long. Plus I'm pretty content in my life without them. My uncle stole a bunch of money from me, so that was the end of that relationship, but then a bunch of other stuff happened with my cousins and my other aunt and uncle, so I just stopped talking to them all. They are all a bunch of rich snobs, and the older I got, the less I could stand to tolerate them generally. My dad is a sex offender. He raped a family member. I hear he's not doing well. He needs a kidney and some other stuff. Someone found him on the floor passed out and all. I care, but not really. Maybe a little. His sister reminded me to call him, but I'm not. He did call my mom to check up on me after I was in the hospital. I haven't spoke to my family all in nearly 20 years. The day it all happened was the day I lost at least 80% of the problems in my life. If I may ask, how do you answer when people ask about your family? I have not spoke to my entire family and including all my relatives for almost 10 years now. But every time people ask me about my family, I still don't know how to answer it without feeling sad and guilty. My grandpa was crushed in a farming accident. He was still alive, but had been pinned for hours under the equipment. When he was found by a family friend, my uncle and mom were called and arrived during the process of getting free from the equipment. My uncle begged the EMTs and firemen to let him die in the field and told them what a piece of shit my grandpa was to them. For reference, my grandpa and grandma, past years prior, had spoiled each of them and neither of them ever had to work hard a day in their lives. The uncle was upset that grandpa hadn't given him some land and hated helping him with chores. Grandpa's still alive, but the mom and uncle are dead to me. Half my dad's family don't speak to him. When my granddad died, he left his farm to my dad. My dad decided to continue the work his father was doing and work on the farm. His siblings were furious he didn't sell it and split the money. Still to this day, he works on the farm, and his siblings don't speak to him. Must be going on over 15 years. I have 2 aunts who make everything about themselves, from family barbecues to other people's birthdays to funerals. Just don't have the energy for that. My grandmother has always been shallow, but after my grandpa died she started bullying me about my weight, and the last straw was when she told me it was a shame I couldn't have bothered losing weight for my wedding. I had done intermittent fasting for months and only lost 10 pounds due to the stress I was under, but regardless, her commentary about my wedding wasn't that I was happy or beautiful, but that I was fat. My sister has tried to kill me or convince me to kill myself my entire life. She's ruined or tried to ruin every connection I have, whether it's family, friends, romantic interests, or teachers' professional connections. Tried to break up my marriage with the sole reason being that her boyfriend had broken up with her and she didn't want to be single and hurting while her sister was, at the time, happily married. The boyfriend was and is a friend of mine and she openly admitted to stalking him, and it got so bad that he had to change churches to avoid her, and moved to the other side of the state briefly. My drug addict cousin took 12 plus Xanax at a party. Multiple people had to tell him to chill the fuck out. At like 4 AM my friend asked him to be quiet cause everyone was sleeping and my cousin was stumbling around the house. So in response my cousin knocked him down and ground pounded his face a dozen times. He tried to apologize the next day and I ignored him. A couple weeks later I was up north hunting, while my cousin showed up at my family's Thanksgiving dinner. My brother later told me that my cousin was bragging about it, even saying my friend had it coming. Piece of shit human. Ever feel like you are invisible and the world down at see you? Imagine that every time you went home. Then imagine all your friends and their families treating you like you mattered, only to go home and be invisible again. Then imagine you're a teenager and you're being abused verbally and mentally. Then imagine your friends and their families going to bat for you and having your back no matter what, only to go home to verbal and emotional abuse. Now imagine being an adult who is self-reliant. I no longer talk to my blood family. But my family has now become my friends and their families. Family is who you will bleed for. My bio mom has several mental illnesses and often says horribly mean things to me. The one that got her cut off was when she told me she wished I would get bent over and arped because I voted for Obama. We didn't speak for 5 years after that. They are fundamentalist Christians who refuse to accept me for who I am. Bisexual atheist, or my children. They will not accept my non-biological children, stepchildren, but they stayed with me when their mom left, as part of the family or include them in any family events, so I stopped going. My kids aren't welcome, then fuck off. Kids are way more important. Nothing so bad that it's going to the skyrocket to the top of this thread, and I deeply feel for the people who suffered the horrible shit here. But basically, I decided being emotionally neglectful and never changing was enough to cut my mom out of my life. While I wouldn't advocate for the nuclear option being anyone's first choice, I would say that ultimately you don't need a big blow up or inciting incident. Choosing yourself is enough.